What's up everyone, Lance Hedrick here, and today we're going to look at these. Alright, so today we're going to be looking at these devices. This is called a Tricolate. Alright, they just came out with these colors recently. I'm really excited about them because I think they're beautiful. The Tricolate. You're asking, well, this is just another brewer. What's so special about it? You just put coffee in, you dump water in, you make coffee. I don't get the difference. Well, what's so great about this is it's kind of the first intentionally made no bypass brewer. Now, if you watched my Pour Over 101 video, and I highly recommend that you do, you will know what bypass is, what the effects of it are, etc. Now, before we get into this, though, I do want to make a quick plea. Please hit that like and subscribe. It would do me a lot of good, especially that, just all of that helps push my videos, keep them in circulation, and helps me grow so that I can continue to increase my production value and give cool stuff away in my Patreon. So just wanted to thank you all in advance for doing that. You rock. Okay, so essentially what we're doing here is they've created a brewer that disallows bypass from occurring. Now you're asking, well, cool, why is bypass not good? Oh, well, it's not necessarily, sorry, I'm multitasking because this base wasn't in all the way, and boom. Cool, well, is bypass bad? No, not necessarily. In fact, bypass, I like some partial bypass in some of my brews. I think it helps with complexity and acidity and nuance. But because of what I like to refer to as stratified extraction. So in like conical brewers like the V60, there's some bypass that occurs. And so you're not getting a fully even extraction throughout all of the grounds. And so that's what I call stratified extraction. Parts of the bed are more extracted than others, some are less extracted than others. And I think it kind of gives you a really interesting cup. Whereas with a flat bottom brewer with minimal bypass, you're going to get a much more even extraction. All of those grounds are going to be kind of somewhat evenly extracted, and it's going to give you a more balanced brew. So there are pros and cons to everything. So when I sit here and say that I enjoy some of the brews from the Tricolate, I'm not saying bypass is a mortal sin. I'm just saying that there are alternatives to brewing, and this is one that is really unique and can really maximize the efficiency in your brewing process. So let's continue on. I'm going to use the clear one so it's easier to see. So in this, what you have is you have this base dish onto which you put a filter. Now the filters look like this. Gotta moisten the fingers to separate the paper. All right, so the filter looks like this. You just kind of drop it in there. Wee, zubba-da-ga, wee, zubba-da-ga, wee, wee, wee. Okay, so we have our little filter in there. Now, as you can imagine, you put the coffee on top, then you pour the water on. The no bypass part comes with the fact that water cannot get into the decanter without going through at least some of the coffee grounds. See what I'm saying? So there is no way to have bypass in this brewer. The coffee sits right on top of the filter. In order for the water to get into the decanter, it must necessarily pass through both the coffee and the filter. So what you're able to do with something like this is you're able to increase your extraction ratio. Now, typically people say do 1 to 16, 1 to 17, 1 to 15 even, and the reason for that is to have a higher TDS, a higher concentration, total dissolved solids, a higher strength of your coffee. With a V60, for instance, if you were to do a higher ratio, 1 to 20, for instance, which, by the way, for those who don't know, 1 to 20 refers to the grams of coffee in comparison or in relation to the grams of water used for a brew. So 1 gram of coffee to 20 grams of water. So that means if you have 20 grams of coffee, you'd have 400 grams used to brew with your water. Anyway, with this, or with a V60, if you did a 1 to 20 brew, for instance, you would have a very, very low TDS. It'd be very weak, watery coffee because a lot of that is bypassing the bed of coffee. It's literally going through the filter into those grooves of the V60, bypassing the bed and going straight into the decanter, essentially without any coffee extracted in it, okay? Now with this, since that's not a thing, there's no bypass going on, you can do a 1 to 20 and have a pretty solid TDS, meaning you can have it in that typical drinking range that people always refer to, the 1.15 to 1.35 for you nerds out there. Now, so this is a really unique way of brewing that gives you that opens up a lot of possibilities with brew styles. I'm going to show you one of my favorite ways to brew with it, but a fun thing to do with these, because the bypass is so low, is to do what people refer to as the Japanese flash brew, cold, like iced coffees. You can do a much smaller ratio, the way you would typically do with a V60, but you'd get a lot more extraction out of it before diluting it, which is a really fun thing to do. You can also do espresso-style extractions without the pressure, meaning you can do a really finely ground coffee with water and let it drip through for about 10 minutes or so, and you're going to get an extremely concentrated cup of espresso style coffee. Obviously there's no emulsification going on because it's sans pressure, but you get where I'm going with it. Now, what a lot of people, thinking about Scott Rao, who kind of made this a famous way of brewing, and Jonathan Gagne, who has done a lot of stuff with this, and a lot of other people around the world who've been playing with these styles of brewers, what they've been doing is playing with 1:20, 1:21, and even 1:22 ratios in order to maximize the extraction. Now, the benefits of this are very economical. What you can think about is, typically, if you're wanting a 200-gram brew of coffee, typically people are doing about 12 to 13 grams of coffee. But with this, you'd be able to lessen the amount of coffee and get the same amount of brewed coffee. You could do about 9 or 10 grams of coffee, do a 1:21 or 1:22 ratio, and get the same amount of beverage. So you're going to be able to lessen the amount of coffee you're using and get a similar brewed amount that has a similar concentration to that of, say, a V60 or a Chemex or a Kalita Wave. All right, so you have economical things there that are interesting to ponder. You're going to be able to have a more efficient extraction. You're going to use your coffee more efficiently. Now, there are some downsides to it. I've noticed in my playing with these a lot of times, and a friend of mine down in Australia, Luca Costanza, who is a cup tasting champion and actually got beat by James Hoffman in the World Brewers Cup Championship. He got third when James got second. Just a fun fact. But he has described to me what he notices as a loss of aroma during this brew. And I have hypotheses as to why this might be. But something that I have noticed is a lack of complexity and a lack of aroma whenever you're extracting really high at really high ratios. But you're still getting really nice cups. And they tend to be more delicate, but some of the complexity, some of that acidity is muted, and some of that aroma is kind of gone with some coffees. I've had some other coffees that do well at those high ratios. But anyway, enough gabbing, enough jibber jabber. Let's go ahead and brew a cup. Now, even though these are, I think, cooler and prettier, I'm going to brew with the transparent ones so that you can see what's going on and how I kind of tackle this style of brewer. And I'm going to have it set up right now. It's all prepared now. All right, so I wetted my filter. I have got the grounds in there. I did 15 grams of coffee. Now, you want to make sure that your bed is nice and flat, so you can give it a little shake. I don't, because I like to grind pretty finely on these to really maximize extraction, I tend to get some clumps, so I like to take a thin WD-T tool, okay, thinner needles. Don't do like these big, massive ones, and also don't do super sharp ones because you could puncture the filter. So this is, you don't have to do this. I have found some nice results, but I like to do just a very light WD-T, making sure that I have declumped, randomized, and flattened the bed pretty nicely. So kind of like do a little bit, check it. All right, so we have that nice and done. All right, so we've got that. Put the dispersion disc on top. Now, just to show you exactly what's going on, the top is a dispersion disc, and what's happening is you pour your water through this, and it spreads it out and kind of showers the water in droplets over the bed to minimize agitation. Whenever you pour with a direct kettle, what can happen is that stream is so direct and so powerful, it can discharge particulates through the filter. Okay, yes, the filter is almost solid, but it's not, obviously, because things get through, and particulates of certain sizes can be pushed through. On top of that, when pouring with a bare kettle, you're more prone to clog the filter with fines, which can stall the brew, choke the brew, whatever you want to call it. So this helps to kind of spread out and shower water droplets over the bed, which allows you to have a longer extraction without particulates getting in that coffee, which can ruin your perceived clarity. But on top of that, it keeps a nice bed integrity because we're using the bed as a filtration in and of itself. So that's what that dish does. And then at the bottom, we have the receiving area. You put the filter on top, and obviously it goes through. Anyway, so what we're going to do now is I have 15 grams in. I'm going to do 330 grams of water. That's a 1:22 ratio. Massive ratio. And the only reason I'm doing this is to kind of show what this is capable of. I'm going to discuss what it tastes like. This is a really soluble, naturally processed Ethiopia a friend sent me. So we're going to see if we're going to be able to get any of those flavors out at the end, like some of those intense, juicy, fruitiness, boozy flavors that come out. We're going to see if we're going to be able to detect that even with a 1 to 22. All right, and just so you know, for you nerds out there, this will typically come out at a 1.2 to 1.3 TDS at a 1 to 22 with a pretty good grinder. All right, so, but you know, 6.5 one does the other. Don't worry about that. Let's get to brewing. I have my water boiling, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to saturate the grounds with, I like to do around 3 times the bloom, or the ground coffee weight. So I'm doing 45 grams, like that. And then what I like to do is I like to ensure all of that water, some can kind of get stuck in the dish. I like to make sure it's all in there, and then I give it just a very slight little swirl. Do not overdo the swirl. That can really clog up that filter. If you overdo the swirl, you're going to find some really long brew times. Now I like to let this sit for about 2 minutes to ensure I have full saturation of the grounds. Now typically people will then pour the rest of their weight of the water. I like to break the rest of my weight into 2 different pours because that's going to further maximize my extraction. All right, so after this bloom, after about a 2-minute rest, because I'm trying to fully saturate those grounds, I'm going to do 2 142-ish gram pours in order to get to my 330 grams. Now, why am I doing 2 pours? I want to ensure that I have giving enough pure solvent to really up the extraction as much as possible. If I poured it all in one go, what's going to happen is that water is going to be exposed immediately to that coffee, and its solvent potential is going to degrade rapidly. So by doing 2 different pours, I'm giving fresh solvent, and we're going to be able to increase that extraction even more. Now, I don't try to pour quickly. I prefer using a gooseneck with these instead of a tea kettle, which is advertised as a way to do it. I don't like pouring that quickly because I find the streams can come out and create divots in the bed. So I like to do just a very gentle pour, just kind of going in circles like you would with a pour over. Just going in gentle circles, just ensuring that we're saturating everything really nicely, really evenly. And we're pouring halfway between this pour and the next pour to hit 330. So here we go. So I'm pouring around 185, 190, somewhere around there. All right. So now I'm going to let this rest. Now I do like to give another gentle swirl. We're just doing very gentle, okay? Now that all the water's through, a little gentle swirl. Nothing crazy. You do want a flat bed the whole time. I'm replacing my kettle because I'm trying to enhance extraction as much as possible, so I'm always using right off the boil water. And that's for a lighter roasted coffees. If you like darker roasted coffees, I would suggest lower temperature. Maybe not do the 2-step brew here. This is just one of many ways you can brew this coffee. Now I'm going to let this water column go down quite a bit. I still want a buffer of water between my shower and the bed. That will help lessen the agitation from the water droplets for this final bit because I don't want to over agitate these grounds. I mostly just want the water to kind of slowly go through that bed of grounds. So once we have just a little bit left, which we are just about there, I'm going to go ahead and pour my next pour. And we're there. So let's go all the way up to our target of 330. Remember, not pouring too fast. We don't want to kill that bed. We don't want to agitate it too much. So I'm just kind of going in circles, pouring nice and slow, nothing crazy. As you can see from the side, even this is still causing some jutting going down into the bed. We're almost at 330. Just doing some circles, and we are at 1 to 22 ratio right there. Now again, I'm going to make sure I have all that water out of the top disc. All right, now I'm going to give it a little swirl. Just to level it out, make sure we have a nice flat bed, and now we can see the water up here is not really saturate those grounds. It's from the percolation of going through the bed that we're going to really be able to extract. Now, in a V60 or in a Kalita, if the water was looking like this above, what that means is the water is reticent to go and to go through the grounds because they've kind of compacted into a puck. So what they would do instead on one of those that has bypass built in is they would go around the bed through the filter and bypass the bed completely because the bed's not in a frenzy. It's very difficult to get through a compacted bed that's this finely ground. So instead of going through it, the water would want to go around it instead. But because this is a no bypass brewer, we can sit here and we can pour as gently as possible. As long as that bed is nice and flat and we're not encouraging channeling, we're gonna have that water pass through all of those grounds, have a really nice high even extraction, as long as we can promote a channelless extraction, which is difficult but can be done as long as you maintain that level bed, ensure that you have a nice flat bed, and you are preparing the grounds as well as possible. All right, so this brew is pretty much done. We're close to 6 minutes. That's another thing that we can do since we are lessening the channels. We don't have to really worry as much about the brew time, but you want to if you're going well over 10 minutes, there may be something wrong. You're probably stalling your brew. But there we have it. Our brew is done, and I would like for y'all to see this bed. So I'm going to show you. So check out that bed. Nice and flat. And that's what we want it to look like. So now we're going to do a little tasting on this coffee to see if that crazy ratio is able to stand up with this coffee. And as I said, some coffees still have high aromatics, still have nice acidity, but a lot of them tend to lose it during this process. So let me grab a cup and we're going to do a little taste. All right, here we go. I'm going to just set this over to the side right there. I like to Jenga. Okay. Then a little chaff got in the cup, so we're going to pull that out. All right, and here we go. Let's get a little swirly, swirly. All right, and here we go. Let's get a little smell. This is still highly aromatic. Of course, this is like a certain style of naturally processed Ethiopia coffee, but yeah, it's got some nice aromatics. Very intense, very syrupy. Let's get a little sip. All right, yeah, so it's very delicate. The body is very low. What you have to remember is this may be a foreign concept, but the bed is acting as a filter in and of itself. Okay, so if we're able to control the water going down and we can stack the water on top and have the water move through it, we're not changing up the bed too much. It's whenever you're pouring with that bare kettle, you're throwing the grounds into a frenzy and it's allowing layering to occur. When we do it like this, we're able to keep the fines in the bed. All right, we're able to keep a lot of those particulates in the bed and disallowing them from passing through the filter or clogging the filter. Does that make sense? Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the interaction. I know a lot of you around the world, are responding to me when I ask questions, so I want to thank you. This is like Dora the Explorer Coffee Lance Man Edition. So, the coffee bed we're using literally, almost lost Jenga. We're literally using it as another filtration method. And so that's one of the brilliant things about this no bypass type system is we're using the bed as filtration, which is holding back fines, and we are able to increase our extraction, increase our ratio, which is going to be more economical with our coffees. And on some coffees, I think it does bring something really delightful to the table. Now, it also tends, in my opinion, to have lower body on occasion. But if you pour it all in at once, it acts kind of like an immersion brew. Still cleans it up because a lot of the oils kind of get caught in the bed as well. Because what's being extracted in that water column above kind of gets lost going through the bed. But you can get some really nice, subtle cups of coffee like this right here, which is honestly heavy on the florality. And it's really tamed that really like kind of boozy grape note to more of a subdued raisin, which I actually really enjoy. It's almost sweeter because that kind of boozy taste is on the back side. It's on the back end now. It's kind of taking a back seat. Okay. So yeah, the prominent notes in this is more like jasmine, lavender, raisin, prune, things like that, a little dried apricot. So it's completely transformed this cup from what I was doing with it, which was more intense fermented grape and things of the like that were much more just intense. And the sweetness was there, but it wasn't as prominent. And now I'm getting a more prominent sweetness, and I'm getting a lot of florality that has come through. And it has dulled the acidity a little bit, but not necessarily in a negative way. Now, again, in my experience, this is not the greatest brew process for every coffee, but it is a fun one to play with. And again, you can do things like the flash brew method while maintaining a high extraction. Or if you like really concentrated beverages, you could do something like a 1 to 12, 1 to 13, and still get a proper extraction. You won't be tasting an under-extracted cup. It'll be properly extracted at a really high concentration. Anyway, lots of fun things that can be done with these brewers. I'm a big fan. For full transparency, I bought version 1 and version 2 with my own money. They did recently send me these colored ones, but it was not to do a video. It was because they really enjoy what I've been doing with my YouTube. And so I wanted to thank you all at Tricolate. But again, I did buy versions 1 and 2 with my own money. So there is no incentive there at all. I bought them and spent quite a bit because they're not cheap. So keep that in mind. These are not cheap brewers. I think they're about $50. But it is a cool one to have in your arsenal. Now I do want to do one last thing before I end. Of course, there's always hacks, right? Now a hack that you can do is if you have an Aeropress, you can take your Aeropress, put a filter down here, put it on top of your decanter, and check that out. You essentially, boom, you essentially have a mini Tricolate. Now, of course, you can't just pour bare kettle, so what you would need to have is something like a mellow drip. Something that I've done is I've taken the head of a mellow drip, the dish of a mellow drip, and I put a gasket from a 58mm Breville machine around it, and it sits perfectly on top and completely insulates the device. So you pour through the mellow drip in the same way that you would pour through this dispersion disc. Or if you have a Gabby, you can pour through that as well. Or if you have a second Aeropress, you could use the lid as a dispersion disc, just like so. But if you want to try it at home and you don't feel like buying the Tricolate, you can absolutely do this. Just know you need to use a smaller dose. I have found that the deeper the bed, the worse the coffee brewed is, which, I mean, I think that makes sense. I don't want to take a lot of time to go into it now. But so you would need to use smaller doses, which can be nice. You could do 7 to 12 gram doses in the Aeropress, whereas in the Tricolate, you could do anywhere from 12 to probably 25 grams. I probably wouldn't do much more than 25 with the width and the bed depth here. Anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching my videos. Thanks for nerding out with me. Thanks for being my Dora the Explorer fan club. I really appreciate you all for taking the time to leave comments, for liking and subscribing and supporting the channel. It all means so much. If you would like to, be in constant communication with me, I do have a Discord that is accessible through my Patreon, just below in the caption. Anyway, it's been a fun ride. Thank you so much. I am just excited to be here. Hope you brew something tasty today, and cheers.